What humbugs these dirks are! A dirk is defined in the Oxford English Dictionary as a long dagger formerly carried as a sidearm by men in the Highlands of Scotland. They are worn day to day as part of Highland culture, and if you see a man in a kilt, you'll often see a dirk sticking out the top of his sock, as they are still worn as part of Scottish formal dress. In the 1700s, dirk was used as a term for any large military dagger, including naval dirks, but these were not midshipmen's dirks. A midshipman might not hold a commission, but these boys were trained to become officers, and they were expected to present themselves as gentlemen. So they wore swords, like the other officers, no matter how young they were. There was a midshipman on the Andromeda who had a sword that was 2/3 the length of his body, and it must have looked like he was lugging around an enormous long sword rather than a sabre. However, officers of all ranks might also carry a dirk. In confined spaces, the short blade could be very useful, with many captains wore their dirks as well as their swords into battle for parrying cuts and thrusts. Many officers who were with Nelson at the Battle of the Nile bought themselves dirks with a crocodile motif. These were based on the crocodile-hilted sword that had been presented to Nelson by Admiral George Cranfield Berkeley. In 1825, midshipmen were actually forbidden to wear dirks. This was because they were worn by what were called volunteers. You might have thought that you can get any lower in the naval pecking order than a mid, but during this period you could, and the Admiralty did not want the two ranks muddled up. Volunteers were lads even younger than mids. They were what would be called cadets once HMS Britannia was converted into a training ship later that century. And the full-length sword would have looked even more ridiculous on these boys than it would on a teenage midshipman. However, these very young volunteers got mixed up with midshipmen in the popular imagination anyway, and their distinctive dirk became associated with both ranks. C.G. Sloane Stanley describes how, when his father was fitting him out for sea in 1850, they were expecting to buy a dirk, and they were surprised when they were told that midshipmen wore swords. It was in 1856 that the dirk became a part of the midshipman's uniform, and they were not impressed. One midshipman serving with the Naval Brigade from HMS Shannon wrote back to his father, "What humbugs these dirks are! They're all very well to walk about in Portsmouth with, but they're no use for real fighting. I don't know what I'd do with mine if I was up against a seaboy." This might have been true, but it did not stop the young gentleman from trying. Arthur Mayo, another midshipman in that naval brigade, became the first midshipman to win a Victoria Cross, charging out in front of his men in order to capture a pair of 6-pounder cannons. The Admiralty, however, were quite pleased with dirks and insisted that mids and cadets continue to wear them, rather than a sword, all the way up until the Second World War. They were worn on slings, like their superior sabres, and clipped into the scabbard. This was so they did not fall out and skewer any sailors who happened to be below them when sent up the ship's rigging. Inscribed dirks were given by HMS Britannia to the two chief cadet captains of each term. These were cadets who performed duties much like prefects in one of the public schools that Britannia emulated. Other dirks were given out as prizes, and in 1923 the King himself started awarding dirks to promising cadets. These had the rather unimaginative name of King's Dirk, and you could tell if a mid was wearing one by looking at the scabbard hanging from his belt. If it had the royal coat of arms, this was a King's Dirk, and the mid would have already distinguished himself in some way, even if he was wiping his nose on his sleeve at the time that you found him. One winner of a King's Dirk was Prince Philip, who became well known for his personal bravery. When he was serving on HMS Valiant, one of his superior officers was walking past one day and asked, "How many are there between you and the Greek throne?" Philip looked perplexed and replied, "9, sir, I think." To which the commander replied, "Well, I still think you'd better wear your tin hat." He did wear his helmet after that, but he never avoided danger. During the Battle of Matapan, he was in command of one of the searchlights. HMS Valiant got within 3,000 yards of an Italian cruiser before lighting up. They fired, and the gunners said they could see the cruiser's turret fly off in the explosion. But fire did not all go one way. An enemy shell ripped through Philip's position, and he was mentioned in dispatches for his conduct. His dirk, with its royal cipher, would have been at the bottom of his sea chest during this action. As by World War II, the dirk had become a purely ceremonial weapon. But if you had used the confusion of the battle to take a closer look at it, you might have seen there was more damage on the scabbard than on the blade. The only time the dirks now saw any action was when their owners were using the scabbards for dealing with vermin. And I don't just mean the more junior residents of the gun room. A sub-lieutenant discovered that there were rats nesting among the sea chests and feasting on the midshipmen's journals. So he set his mids to rout them out from their nest. They ran round whacking at the rats with their scabbards, while he stood by the door with a golf club. He dispatched them as they scuttled past, the rats that is, which let him kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He got rid of some gunroom pests, and he lowered his golf handicap at the same time.